So if they have an actual fear outside of just like the feeling of fear, it's still involuntary, but that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about incels. When we're talking about incels, we're talking about men who desire to be with a woman and for a like myriad of reasons are not able to get what they want out of a woman, right? There are some factors to it. Social skills is one. The other part I alluded to the other day is that the majority of women aren't actually registering the majority of men that exist in the world. They don't show up in their peripheral. It's almost like an object just kind of off to the side of your vision. They're not registered as human beings. I think that can create a lot of frustration. I think the other part is that, like, some women now with social media are over evaluating themselves. And so the men that they would traditionally pair up with, they now feel better than, right? Mm-hmm. Sex work is also illegal, right? That has an aspect to it, right? I think that these robots are going to be really interesting because theoretically you could open up a business out of it, right? But there's so many factors to it. So you also have trauma. You also have this, I think we talked about it on the show a couple of times about this idea of what a good guy is, a good man is, right? Some people self-proclaim that without having that label attributed to them. And so they find no fault in what they're doing when really their behavior is socially unacceptable, right? Women do it too, but we're talking about incels and not femcells right now. So there's a whole lot of reasons. Some of them are self-inflicted, some of them not so much, right? So traditionally, before the numbers started to rise, you'd find people with disabilities to find themselves as like people who are incels. They still have a drive, they still have an attraction, but they are, because of their appearance, aren't able to attract a woman, right? But now that with kind of this gender war going on, it's increased those numbers. And so now you have more and more men who are frustrated, which just puts women in an unfortunate predicament as well.
Okay. And to the chat, by the way, like I was in intently listening because I it's hard for me to grasp the concept because I'm not the I'm kind of socially awkward, but I've never had an issue. So when I hear this, it's just hard for me to wrap my mind around it, which is why I ask, and that's just letting the chat know when they went off a little bit. I'm curious.
So one of the I like watched a video, a documentary on the incels. It's this dude, We Waffles. I went to his channel and watched all of these videos about it. I found out about all of these terms. And what I noticed is like a lot of men see, and I've been having this issue like throughout the week, right? When I watch men explain things, it seems as though to me they like for a large majority of men, they need things to be in extremely black and white. Like if something exists in a gray area, then it's a problem. And it seems like they also struggle with nuance when they need things to be like that. And because of that,
women live. We live
in the gray, it's exactly where they live. Right. And because for whatever reason they're not able to understand the nuance and not view it, it comes off as lying to them. So now they can't navigate it correctly because they're offended because they feel like they're being lied to when it's just more information needed to really understand it. Things are situational. It's all type of things that rotate between it. I was trying to look up if there's an actual condition for not being able to understand nuance, because like that, it just keeps going back to that for me. Like the nuance of understanding social interaction seems missed. So sometimes people don't understand how they may come off. They don't understand how they're coming off in interactions. So it may seem all women are just mean or all women are XYZ because they don't have the tools or the skill set or the experience to be able to navigate that effectively. And if you, I think it's called The Rise of the Incels, the documentary on YouTube. It's scary how that unchecked can devolve into a whole lot of other stuff. It could turn into some things. It definitely could turn into some things.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead if you wanted something to say to Marcus, because I wanted to pull up this comment.
No, go ahead.
Well, not the not understanding nuance, but I recently saw something about something called alexithymia, and it was saying that a lot majority, not most men, but most people who have this condition are men, and it's the inability to understand emotion. And I was kind of watching videos about that. It was pretty like, oh, okay. Like I can see some of that like in these spaces, which I don't think that a lot of the men in these spaces actually have that as a like what I would say is a diagnosis, but it just reminded me, like the symptoms of that reminded me of being in these spaces when you were talking about not really being able to see the nuances or understand the grays or whatever. And women, we live in that area because we are dealing in emotion, and a lot of times to men that doesn't really seem rational. And so that's what made me think about that.
Yeah. A lot of times they think that they view it as if everything is directly opposite to what you want, right? So for instance, when women say they don't want to control the man, men will interpret that and think, oh, she just wants somebody she can walk all over and everything has to be her way. When in reality, what she's saying most of the time is, I don't want a man that's harmfully controlling. And there's a nuance and a balance to the scale to understand, like, hey, when I'm acting like this, I'm okay. I actually am turned on by you being dominant and saying no, or setting boundaries that I'd be like, oh, okay, well, I can't try that with him. But because it's a black and white thing, when they say I don't want a man that's controlling, okay, I won't be controlling. Now that I'm not controlling, she says I'm too soft. Now that I'm too soft, she says, and that middle area is where all the answers lie. But because the way they are interpreting the information, they'll hear that and say, this woman is a liar. She doesn't know what she wants. But if you like study the gray area or understand the gray area, you will see it's predictable. Like it's not like, yeah, it does. I understand how it makes sense. If I was to write it, because you can't write it in a stat sheet and understand it. You have to experience it, because it's an act of being, right? An act of knowing and being. You have to be in the mix with a woman to understand, like, this might not be the time to talk about this, or this the time to X, Y. It's really like social cues and social interactions. And it's only getting worse because we staring at each other through computer screens, and 90% of communication is nonverbal, right? Reading body language is something that people struggle with now because they're not having the face-to-face interactions with one another. If you don't, when I lost my contact, when I had pink eye and I couldn't put my contacts in, I was lost because I couldn't see what was going on, and I didn't realize how much I hear through my eyes. I really couldn't, like, I think somebody was mad at me when they wasn't. I think they were saying something they wasn't, because I can't see your reaction to stuff. And I tried to like empathetically apply that to men who can't understand nuance, and I could see how they could be so frustrated, because if you don't have the ability to see through your eyes and understand what's going on, you really out here just swinging in the dark, and you're mad because you're like, hey, I did exactly what you said. Why am I getting this result? And then somebody says, well, it's a little different than that. And they're like, well, tell me the formula. And you're like, there's not really a precise formula. You just kind of got to feel your way through. Oh my God, I got to give up. It's just too much.